I was erased from my family after high school and disappeared without a fight. For 11 years, they told everyone I failed. Then I walked into my sister's wedding as a guest. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I just stood there until the room slowly realized who I was and everything shifted. Before I reveal the next twist, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this tale moves across the world. Chandeliers scattered light across marble floors, their reflections bouncing off tailored suits and silk gowns. Money didn't shout here. It whispered, confident it would be obeyed. My husband, Evan, sensed my hesitation immediately. His hand settled at the small of my back, warm and steady, the way it had been since the early days when everything we owned fit into 2 suitcases. Breathe, he murmured. We earned our place here. Our son Miles, 6 years old and already impatient with formal wear, tugged at his bow tie like it was personally offending him. Mom, this thing is attacking my neck. I knelt, fixing the fabric and smiling. Just a little longer, deal? You behave through the speeches, and afterward we conquer the pool. That earned a grin. We straightened just as the crowd shifted, and my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I knew that posture, the slight tilt of the head when she laughed, the way she leaned forward like she was sharing a secret even when she wasn't. I hadn't seen that gesture in over a decade, but recognition slammed into me with brutal clarity. The bride turned. Our eyes met across the room. Lena, my sister. The champagne flute trembled in my fingers. I steadied it before anyone noticed, though inside me something fractured cleanly. I hadn't connected the groom's name on the invitation, Dr. Nathan Hale, to her new last name. I'd assumed she was still Lena Caldwell, still orbiting our parents' clinic back in Ravenwood, Vermont. Her gasp was audible. Conversation faltered. Music played on, unaware, while a bubble of silence stretched between us like a held breath. Behind her, my mother's face drained, then flushed. My father moved instantly, stepping between us as if I were a threat to be neutralized. He'd always been fast when it came to protecting her. What are you doing here? My mother hissed, loud enough to draw attention. For a split second, the old shame tried to rise. I was 21 again, standing in the rain with a suitcase and nowhere to go. Then Evan stepped forward. My wife is a guest, he said calmly. She's the CEO of Nevera Health Systems. We were invited by the groom. The name landed like a dropped glass. I saw heads turn, brows lift, recognition ripple outward through the cluster of physicians and hospital executives nearby. Nevera, someone whispered. That's her, another murmured. A woman in a deep, wine-colored gown leaned toward her companion. That's Isla Caldwell. My father's words echoed from the past, sharp as broken glass. If you won't help at the clinic, don't come back. The memory dissolved as I stood there now, wrapped in silk instead of rain, years of survival behind me. Dr. Nathan Hale approached, confusion knitting his brow. His gaze flicked from my parents to me. You're with Nevera, he asked. We've been trying to partner with your company for months. Your remote monitoring platform is changing post-op recovery. Lena tried to smile. It didn't hold. My parents exchanged a look of pure panic. I could have ended everything right there. I could have spoken the truth they'd buried for 11 years. But power isn't always loud. Hello, Lena, I said simply. Congratulations. She flinched like I'd struck her. Miles looked up at me, oblivious. Mom, is the lady in the white dress your friend? Nathan's attention sharpened. Your sister, he asked Lena slowly. I thought you said she dropped out. The lie cracked. Lena opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time in my life, she had nowhere to hide. And in that moment, standing under crystal light with my family finally unable to rewrite me, I realized something unmistakable. I hadn't come back to beg, explain, or forgive. I had come back as proof. And this was only the beginning. I stayed where I was, champagne untouched, while the room slowly found its voice again. The music swelled, conversations resumed in uneven bursts, but the current had shifted. People were no longer pretending nothing had happened. They were watching, listening. Lena's hand tightened around Nathan's arm as she guided him toward a circle of doctors. Her smile polished, her posture immaculate. If I hadn't known her as well as I did, I might have believed the performance. But I recognized the signs, the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her laugh climbed half a note too high when she was improvising. Evan leaned closer. "Do you want to leave?" I looked down at Miles, who was already scanning the dessert table like a general planning conquest. "Not yet," I said quietly. "We didn't come all this way to disappear." Across the ballroom, my mother fluttered between groups, intercepting conversations before they could drift too close to me. My father hovered near Lena, his stance wide and protective, the same posture he used to take when patients questioned billing or when I used to ask uncomfortable questions as a teenager. A woman with silver hair and a confident stride approached me, eyes bright with recognition. "Isla Caldwell," she asked, extending her hand. "Dr. Renata Moore, Northwestern Medical Network." I shook her hand. "Nice to meet you." "We implemented your monitoring system last quarter," she said. "Our readmission rates dropped by nearly 25%. Frankly, it's changed how we staff post-op care." "That's great to hear," I replied, genuine pride warming my chest. Behind her, I saw Lena falter mid-sentence. One of the doctors she was speaking to frowned slightly, clearly listening to Renata's praise. The comparison was unspoken, but it was there. As more people drifted toward me, hospital administrators, surgeons, researchers, the imbalance grew impossible to ignore. Evan joined the conversation easily, answering clinical questions with the quiet authority of someone who had saved lives in operating rooms before breakfast. Miles tugged at my hand again. "Mom, cake." "In a minute," I said, smiling. "Almost there." Nathan watched the scene from across the room, confusion etched into his face. He excused himself from Lena and approached, careful, measured. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't realize you were family." I met his gaze. "You didn't know. That's not on you." He nodded, but his eyes kept flicking back to Lena, who was now deep in conversation with my parents, their heads bent together in urgent whispers. "She told me you left school," he said, "that you struggled." I felt the old ache flare, then settle. "I struggled," I said honestly, "just not the way she described." He studied me, surgeon's mind recalibrating. "Would you be willing to talk later? I have questions." "Of course," I replied. "Tonight might not be the best time, though." He exhaled, relieved. "Fair." My father appeared at my side without warning. "You need to leave," he said under his breath. "You're upsetting people." "I was invited," I replied calmly, "and I'm not responsible for what the truth disrupts." His jaw tightened. "You always did like attention." Evan's hand slid into mine, grounding. "She's not the one causing a scene," he said evenly. "She's just existing." A few nearby guests went quiet. My father noticed. He stepped back, recalculating. Miles, blissfully unaware, looked up at him. "Sir, can I have cake now?" The tension broke, awkward laughter rippling outward. I crouched to Miles's level. "Go on," I said. "But one piece." He ran off, mission accomplished. I straightened just as Lena approached. Up close, I could see the cracks in her composure, the faint tremor in her hands, the mascara she'd reapplied too carefully. "Why are you here?" she asked, voice low and sharp. I held her gaze. "Because I was invited." "You knew this would happen," she hissed. "I didn't plan anything," I said. "I didn't even know it was you." Her eyes flicked to Evan, then back to me. "You could have left." "So could you," I replied gently. She flinched. "You were supposed to stay gone." The words landed, heavy with years of unspoken agreement. I felt something inside me finally loosen. I stopped disappearing, I said. That's all. Nathan appeared behind her, his presence shifting the air. Lena, he said, we need to talk. Her face drained of color. I'll find you later, I told him, and stepped back, giving them space. As they moved away, my mother hurried over, smile brittle. Isla has always been ambitious, she said loudly to no one in particular. We worried she burned out. A nearby administrator raised an eyebrow. Burned out, he repeated. She just closed a partnership with 3 major hospital systems. My mother's smile froze. Evan squeezed my hand. I think it's time, he murmured. I nodded. We'd made our point without saying a word. As we walked toward the exit, I glanced back once. Lena stood rigid beside Nathan, my parents flanking her, their expressions tight with fear and calculation. For the first time, they couldn't control the narrative. The elevator doors closed behind us with a soft finality. Miles bounced on his toes. Pool! Yes. I laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. Pool! And as we walked away, I realized something profound. I didn't need to confront them to reclaim myself. I had already done that by building a life they could no longer erase. The pool lights shimmered against the dark glass walls as Miles cannonballed into the water, shrieking with delight. Evan sat on the edge, shoes off, sleeves rolled, watching him with the relaxed vigilance of someone who knew exactly when to intervene and when to let joy run wild. I leaned back in the lounge chair, the hum of the resort finally quieting the noise still echoing in my head. For the first time that evening, my shoulders dropped. You okay? Evan asked without looking away from the pool. Yes, I said, surprised by how true it felt. I didn't realize how much tension I was carrying until it let go. He smiled slightly. You handled it exactly how you always do. Calm, unshakable. Miles surfaced, slicking his hair back dramatically. Did you see that one? I did, Evan laughed. Olympic level. We stayed longer than planned, letting the adrenaline drain away. By the time we returned to our suite, Miles was half asleep, wrapped in a towel and yawning like a lion cub. Evan tucked him into bed, murmuring a story about underwater castles and heroic sharks. I stood by the window, watching the lights of Silver Pine's summit glitter against the dark mountains. There was a knock at the door. I knew who it would be before Evan even reached for the handle. Dr. Nathan Hale stood in the hallway, jacket off, tie loosened, the careful composure of a man whose world had tilted off axis, but who was still trying to stand upright. I'm sorry to intrude, he said quietly. I didn't know who else to talk to. Evan glanced at me. I nodded. Come in, I said. Nathan stepped inside, his gaze briefly sweeping the room, lingering on the family photos on the side table. Miles at the beach, Evan and me at a conference, laughter frozen mid-moment. He swallowed. She lied to me, he said finally. I gestured toward the chair by the window. Sit. He did, rubbing his hands together like he was scrubbing something invisible from his skin. Not just about you, about everything. Her education, her role at the clinic. I started asking questions after the reception. Simple ones. The kind that shouldn't have answers that change every time. I said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, was often the kindest thing you could offer someone when truth was dawning. She said Stanford had a special remote program, he continued. I knew that wasn't right. Then, she said she'd been mostly administrative, which contradicted what she told my colleagues earlier. By the time I pressed, your parents stepped in. Evan leaned against the wall, arms folded, protective but unobtrusive. They told me you were unstable, Nathan said, that you'd always been jealous, that you left because you couldn't handle pressure. I met his eyes. And did that match what you saw tonight? No, he said softly. Not even close. He exhaled long and slow. I went back to our suite and checked some things. Old emails, the clinic's website, public records. Her name isn't on anything substantial. She's listed as a coordinator, not a manager, not an administrator. The weight of it pressed into the room. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I didn't know I was marrying into this." "You didn't choose the lies," I replied. "Only what you do next matters." He nodded, jaw tight. "I don't know what that is yet." "That's okay," Evan said evenly. "You don't have to decide tonight." Nathan's shoulders sagged with relief at the permission. "I won't ask you to cover for me," he said to me, "or to explain anything. I just needed to hear the truth from someone who isn't trying to protect an image." "You've heard it," I said. "What you do with it is yours." Another knock interrupted us, sharper this time. Before anyone could move, the door opened. Lena stood there. Her hair was pulled back hastily, pearls gone, makeup smudged despite her efforts. She looked smaller without the ballroom and the audience. "Nathan," she said urgently, "you can't just disappear." He stood. "We need to talk." "Not here," she snapped, then caught herself when she saw Evan and me. Her eyes hardened. "Of course you're here." I didn't rise to it. "Say what you need to say," I told her calmly. "Then leave." She laughed, brittle and humorless. "You always did like pretending you're above it." "And you always liked pretending I wasn't real," I replied. Her mouth opened, closed. She turned to Nathan, desperation creeping into her voice. "They're manipulating you. They've always resented me." She couldn't handle that I stayed. "I stayed because they took my tuition money," I said quietly. The words landed with a dull thud. Nathan's head snapped toward her. "Is that true?" Lena's silence was answer enough. "You told me your parents paid for everything," he said slowly. "You told me your sister dropped out." "I didn't drop out," I said. "I was forced out." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but anger still burned beneath them. "You think you're better than me now? You think because you made it big, you get to humiliate me?" "I didn't come here to humiliate you," I said. "I came because I exist." Nathan took a step back from her. "We'll talk later," he said, "but not like this." She reached for him. He didn't let her. When the door closed behind her, the room felt lighter and heavier at the same time. "I'm sorry you were pulled into this," Nathan said to me, "but I'm grateful you didn't lie." "I don't do that anymore," I replied. After he left, Evan locked the door quietly. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said again. And again it was true. The next morning, the resort buzzed with aftermath. Breakfast conversations carried an edge. People glanced at me with curiosity, respect, sometimes sympathy. I met it all with calm. Lena didn't appear. My parents checked out early. By the time we packed our bags, the mountain air felt cleaner, as if something long stagnant had finally moved on. As we drove away from Silver Pine Summit, Miles fell asleep in the back seat, clutching a souvenir towel. Evan reached over, lacing his fingers with mine. "You know," he said, "whatever happens next, you didn't lose anything there." I looked out at the passing pines, the road unfolding ahead of us. "No," I said softly. "I finally left it behind." And somewhere behind us, in a ballroom full of crystal light and broken illusions, the story my family told about me began to fall apart, without me lifting a finger. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, the way truth usually does, through side doors, hushed conversations, and questions that could no longer be brushed aside. We returned home to Harborcrest, the coastal city where Navarra Health Systems had taken root. Just as the first emails began to land, Evan went straight back into surgery the next morning, steady as ever, while I sat in my office overlooking the bay, staring at my inbox as if it might blink first. It didn't. A message from a hospital administrator in Boston, another from a compliance officer in Chicago, then one from a former nurse at the Caldwell Family Clinic. The clinic my parents had run for decades, the same one where I'd spent my teenage afternoons filing charts while Lena practiced piano. Each message circled the same thing. Questions. Inconsistencies. Names that didn't line up. I didn't answer immediately. Experience had taught me the danger of reacting too fast, especially when emotions still lingered in the bloodstream. Instead, I forwarded everything to Navarra's legal counsel and requested a formal review. Transparency had been the foundation of what we built. I wasn't about to compromise that now. By midday, my phone rang. Nathan Hale. I let it go to voicemail the first time. The second time I answered. "I'm sorry to keep calling," he said, voice tight, "but things are escalating." "I assumed they would," I replied calmly. "The clinic is being audited," he continued. "Not because of you, because of what I found after the wedding." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "What did you find?" "Billing patterns," he said. "Medicare codes that don't match procedures. Repeated claims for services that couldn't possibly have been performed at the frequency listed." I said nothing. "They've been doing it for years," he added. "At least 15. The number landed hard. 15 years meant it started right around the time I left for college. Right around the time my tuition money vanished. "I reported it," he said, anonymously. I couldn't unsee it. "You did the right thing," I said. There was a pause. "Lena knows it was me." I imagined her fury, her panic, the way she would spin blame outward before ever looking inward. "I'm sorry," I said again and meant it. "She's been calling non-stop," he admitted, begging, threatening, promising everything will change. "And will it?" I asked. Another pause. "No." We ended the call quietly without drama. There was nothing left to say. That evening, Evan found me in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. "You don't have to be strong tonight," he said gently. I set the knife down. "I know." He pulled me into his arms, and for a moment I let the weight settle. Only for a moment. Long enough to acknowledge it, not long enough to carry it forward. 2 days later, the letter arrived. Certified, official, heavy with implication. The Office of Medical Integrity requested my testimony regarding my time at the Caldwell Family Clinic. They wanted records, context, confirmation. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to our attorney. "I'll cooperate," I said, "but only with documented facts." "That's wise," she replied, "and protective." The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the rumors spread. Lena's wedding photos vanished from social media. The clinic's website went dark. My mother stopped answering calls. My father left 2 voicemails I didn't listen to. Miles noticed before I said anything. "Why doesn't Grandma call anymore?" he asked one night, tracing shapes on the dinner table with his finger. I knelt beside him. "Sometimes grown-ups need time to sort things out," I said. "It's not your job to fix it." He nodded, accepting that answer with the trust only children can manage. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. No grand courtroom, no audience, just a long table, neutral walls, and a panel of people whose job it was to separate truth from performance. I brought my records, every pay stub, every transcript, every email documenting my role at the clinic before I was pushed out. When they asked why I left, I told them. Not emotionally, factually. When I questioned billing discrepancies, I was told I was being disruptive. I said evenly. When I asked where my tuition funds went, I was asked to leave. They took notes. When they asked about Lena's role, I told them what I knew and what I didn't. "She worked reception," I said. "I never saw her manage operations or finances." When they asked if I believed fraud had occurred, I paused. "I believe patterns don't lie," I said, "and neither do records." That was enough. The clinic was shut down within a month. Not dramatically, methodically. Licenses suspended, accounts frozen, assets reviewed. My parents lost their livelihood in silence. The house in Ravenwood went on the market quietly. The neighbors whispered. The town avoided eye contact. Lena moved out of state. Nathan filed for annulment. Through it all, I remained still. Not detached, just anchored. One afternoon, While reviewing a proposal in my office, Meredith buzzed through the intercom. "There's a woman here asking to see you. She says it's personal." My stomach tightened. "I'll take it," I said. Lena stood when I entered the conference room. Gone were the pearls, the practiced confidence. She wore a plain sweater, hair pulled back, eyes rimmed red. "You sent the records," she said. "Yes," I replied. "You destroyed everything," she accused, voice cracking. I met her gaze. "No." I stopped protecting a lie. She laughed bitterly. "You always had to be right." "No," I said quietly. "I had to survive." She sank into a chair. "I don't know how to do anything else," she whispered. "They made me this way." I believed her. But belief doesn't require rescue. "I hope you figure it out," I said. "Truly." She looked up, eyes searching. "That's it. That's it." She left without another word. That night, Evan and I sat on the balcony, watching the harbor lights shimmer. "Do you feel relieved?" he asked. I considered it. "I feel aligned," I said. "There's a difference." The next morning, I finalized paperwork for a new initiative, one that would fund scholarships for students without family support entering medical technology fields. Not in my parents' name, in mine, because if something was going to grow from this, it would be something honest. As I signed the last document, I realized something quietly monumental. The story I'd been cast in, the ungrateful daughter, the difficult sister, the one who left, had finally ended. And I hadn't rewritten it. I'd simply stopped participating. The months that followed settled into a strange, steady rhythm, one where the noise of the past faded, but its echoes still surfaced when I least expected them. After the clinic closed, the town of Ravenwood went quiet in a way small towns do when something shameful happens. No public outrage, no rallies, just doors closing a little faster, conversations lowering when certain names were mentioned. The kind of silence that wasn't forgiveness, but wasn't curiosity either. It was avoidance. My parents disappeared into that silence. Through an acquaintance, I learned they'd moved into a rented duplex outside town. Smaller, anonymous, no brass nameplate by the door, no clinic sign bearing our family name. My father took a temporary consulting role. Paperwork, nothing clinical. My mother volunteered at a community pantry, telling anyone who would listen that helping others kept her busy. They never reached out to me directly, not with anger, not with apology, just absence. And for the first time in my life, that absence felt like relief. Navarra, on the other hand, grew louder. Hospitals that had been hesitant now called eagerly. Transparency mattered more than ever in healthcare, and the fact that we cooperated fully with regulators, even when it meant opening old wounds, earned trust money couldn't buy. Our monitoring system expanded into 5 more networks by the end of the quarter. I spent my days in meetings, my nights reviewing proposals, and my early mornings drinking coffee on the balcony while the city woke up below me. I liked that life demanded my focus for reasons that mattered. Still, there were moments when the past intruded. One afternoon, while sorting through old files to prepare for a compliance audit, I came across an envelope I hadn't opened in years. My handwriting stared back at me from the corner. Tight, careful, hopeful. College housing forms. Inside were copies of emails I'd sent at 19, asking my parents for help when my dorm contract fell through, asking if I could come home for a semester, asking if we could talk. Their replies, short, dismissive, conditional, were clipped neatly behind them. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding not with pain, but with something sharper. Recognition. I hadn't imagined it. I closed the folder and slid it into the shredder. That night, Evan found me standing in the kitchen long after dinner, staring at nothing. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said gently. "I know," I replied. I just needed to remember why I stopped trying. Miles patted in moments later, dragging his blanket behind him. "Mom, can you read the shark book again?" I smiled, crouching to his level. "Of course." As I read, his head resting against my arm, the words blurred, not from tears, but from gratitude. This was the life I'd chosen. This was the family I'd built with intention instead of obligation. A week later, an unexpected email arrived. From Lena. The subject line was simply, "I don't know who else to say this to." I didn't open it right away. I waited until the house was quiet, until Miles was asleep and Evan was in the shower. Then I sat at my desk and clicked. She wrote without polish, without the careful phrasing she'd once mastered so well. She wrote about the annulment, about moving into a small apartment 2 states away, about the first job she'd ever applied for without our parents making the call, about how she froze during the interview because she didn't know how to describe herself without borrowing someone else's story. "I don't think I ever learned how to be real," she wrote. I closed my eyes. The truth was I'd known that for years. She asked nothing of me. No money. No introductions. No rescue. Just acknowledgement. I typed one sentence back. "I hope you figure out who you are without them. That part has to be yours." I didn't send more. I didn't need to. Weeks passed. The city moved into summer. Miles learned to ride his bike without training wheels, wobbling down the sidewalk with fierce concentration. Evan came home late one night with tired eyes and a quiet smile. "Successful transplant," he said, collapsing onto the couch. I handed him a glass of water. "Proud of you." He studied me for a moment. "You seem lighter." "I am," I admitted. I stopped bracing for impact. The true reckoning arrived, not in a confrontation, but in a letter. Handwritten. My mother's. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent she'd worn my entire childhood. She wrote carefully, as if choosing each word cost her something. She didn't apologize outright. She didn't justify herself either. She wrote about shame, about not knowing how to face the town, about realizing too late that love measured in comparison always loses, about missing Miles. "I don't expect forgiveness," she ended. "I just wanted you to know I see you now." I folded the letter and set it aside. Seeing someone too late doesn't undo what happened before, but it does close a door properly. I never wrote back. Instead, I booked a long weekend away with Evan and Miles. No work, no phones, just ocean air and time that belonged to us. On the final morning, standing on the shore while Miles chased waves and Evan laughed behind me, I felt something settle fully into place. I had crossed the point of no return. Not away from them, toward myself. When we returned home, I finalized the scholarship fund. 20 students, full tuition, mentorship, no strings. When the press asked why, I answered simply, because talent shouldn't be buried by silence. And for the first time, my story wasn't framed by what my family did to me, but by what I chose to build without them. I slept well that night, deep, dreamless, unburdened. And I knew the hardest part was finally over, not because everything was fixed, but because I no longer needed it to be. The first time I saw my parents after everything collapsed, it wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no raised voices, no moment where the world seemed to pause to acknowledge the weight of what had been lost. It happened in a grocery store on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that blends into every other if you let it. I was reaching for a carton of milk when I felt it, that old, instinctive tightening in my chest, the sense of being watched. I turned. My mother stood 3 aisles down, frozen in front of the canned goods. She looked smaller than I remembered, her coat hanging loose on her shoulders, her hair pulled back without its usual care. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she pushed her cart forward. I considered leaving. I could have turned, walked away, pretended I hadn't seen her. No one would have blamed me. But something inside me, quiet, steady, said no. Not because I owed her anything, but because I no longer feared the encounter. We stopped a few feet apart. "Isla," she said softly. "Mom," I replied. Her eyes flicked past me, as if expecting my father to appear. You look well." "I am." She nodded, swallowing. I heard about the scholarship fund. I waited. That was generous, she added. People talk. I didn't do it for them, I said calmly. I know. She hesitated, then surprised me by saying, I wish I'd understood you earlier. I studied her face, searching for manipulation, for the familiar emotional pull. There was none, just regret, raw and unadorned. I can't change what happened, she continued. But I want you to know. I see now that we asked you to carry what wasn't yours. The words landed, not as balm, but as acknowledgement. That matters, I said, but it doesn't change my boundaries. I wouldn't expect it to, she said quickly. I just wanted to say it. We stood there for another moment, two women linked by history, but no longer defined by it. When we parted, it wasn't with hugs or promises, just a quiet understanding that something had ended properly. I walked out lighter than I'd gone in. At home, Evan listened without interruption as I told him. How do you feel? He asked when I finished. Peaceful, I said after a moment. Not reconciled, just settled. That's healthy, he smiled. Miles burst into the room moments later, waving a paper crown he'd made at school. Mom, I'm the king of space. Obviously, Evan said gravely. We should bow. Miles laughed, clambering onto the couch between us, and in that laughter, the past lost another piece of its hold. The investigation into the Caldwell Clinic continued quietly. My name surfaced occasionally, always attached to cooperation and transparency. I answered questions, provided records, nothing more. I refused interviews. This wasn't a spectacle. It was a correction. Lena sent one more message months later. Short, careful. I'm enrolled in a certification program. Medical coding. Entry level. I'm scared, but I'm doing it anyway. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Being scared doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. She sent back a single word. Thanks. That was enough. At Nevada, the board approved expansion into international markets. The work consumed me in the best way. Challenging, purposeful, forward-facing. I stood in rooms where decisions were made, not because I'd fought for space, but because I belonged there. One evening, after a long day, I found Evan in the kitchen teaching Miles how to slice strawberries safely. Their heads bent together, identical looks of concentration on their faces. Something in my chest swelled. This was the legacy I cared about. Not bloodlines, not approval, but presence. Later that night, after Miles was asleep, Evan poured us both a glass of wine. You've changed, he said thoughtfully. So have you, I replied. He smiled. Fair, but you're quieter inside. I stopped arguing with ghosts, I said. He reached for my hand. I'm proud of you. The words settled deep, not as validation, but as companionship. As summer edged toward fall, I received an invitation to speak at a national healthcare conference. The topic, ethical innovation and accountability. I accepted. Standing on that stage weeks later, I spoke not about my family, but about systems, how transparency protects people, how silence enables harm, how responsibility doesn't end where discomfort begins. The applause was steady, respectful. Afterward, a young woman approached me, eyes bright with nerves. I grew up like that, she said quietly. The invisible one. I smiled gently. You don't have to stay invisible. She nodded, clutching her notebook like a lifeline. Moments like that reminded me why I'd walked through fire instead of around it. Back home, I planted a small garden in the backyard, herbs, tomatoes, things that required patience and care. Miles helped, solemn in his responsibility. Plants need space, I told him. Too close and they don't grow right. He considered that seriously. Like people. Yes, I said softly. Exactly like people. The first frost came early that year. I stood outside one morning, breath fogging the air, watching sunlight catch on leaves just beginning to turn. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who believed endurance was love, that silence was safety. She'd been wrong, and she'd survived anyway. I went inside, closed the door against the cold, and stepped fully into the life I'd chosen. One built not on what I'd been denied, but on what I'd finally allowed myself to have. And for the first time, I wasn't looking back to see who followed. I was walking forward, certain of where I stood. The call came on an ordinary Thursday morning, the kind that usually meant routine approvals or calendar changes. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. Ms. Caldwell, the woman on the line said, professional but careful. This is Deputy Director Elaine Porter from the Office of Medical Integrity. We've concluded the primary phase of our investigation. There's one final matter we need to discuss with you. I closed my office door before answering. I'm listening. We've determined that your parents were not only aware of the fraudulent billing practices, but directly authorized them over a period of years, she continued. However, there is an outstanding question regarding the initial redirection of funds from an educational trust established in your name. My hand tightened around the phone. They used my college fund, I said. Yes, she replied, but the way it was moved suggests premeditation, not impulse. We believe those funds were the seed money that allowed the clinic to expand into its most profitable phase. The room went very still. We're preparing criminal charges, she said. Before that happens, we need your formal statement regarding consent. I never gave it, I said immediately. I didn't even know until years later. Then we'll proceed, she said. There's one more thing. Because those funds were legally yours, you may be entitled to restitution. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I don't want it. There was a pause. You're certain? Yes, I said. Redirect it. Patient restitution. Scholarships. Anything that undoes harm. Her tone softened. That will be noted. After the call ended, I sat for a long time, staring at the harbor beyond my window. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet finality. That evening, Evan noticed immediately. Something happened, he said, handing me a mug of tea. They're filing charges, I replied. It's real now. He sat beside me. How do you feel? I searched myself honestly. Done. He nodded. That's different from numb. Yes, I agreed. It is. The news broke 2 weeks later. Local papers first, then regional, then national healthcare outlets picked it up, not sensationalized, but damning in its clarity. Fraud. License revocation. Criminal proceedings pending. The Caldwell Family Clinic, once spoken of with pride, became a cautionary tale. My parents' names were printed in black and white. I didn't read every article. I didn't need to. Lena called that night. I hesitated before answering, then picked up. They're arresting Dad, she said, voice shaking. Mom too. Tomorrow morning. I closed my eyes. I know, I said gently. She inhaled sharply. Did you push this? No, I replied. I stopped stopping it. Silence stretched between us. They're asking me to testify, she whispered. Against them. That's your decision, I said. Not mine. I don't know who I am if I do, she admitted. I thought about the years I'd spent not knowing who I was because I'd been told who to be. You'll find out, I said. Either way. She cried then, not theatrically, not angrily, just grief. I wish I'd seen it sooner, she said. I wish you'd seen me sooner, I replied quietly. She didn't argue. When the call ended, I sat alone for a while before Evan joined me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. You don't have to carry her either, he reminded me. I know, I said, but I can still care. The trial moved quickly. Overwhelming evidence tends to do that. I was called to testify for one day only, not about fraud, but about the money. Standing in that courtroom, I felt no fear, no resentment, just clarity. I never consented, I said simply. I was excluded from the decision. I was told the money was gone. My parents avoided my eyes. The verdict came 3 weeks later. Guilty. Sentencing followed, measured, procedural, unavoidable. My parents were led away without drama, without speeches, without one last attempt to justify themselves. Lena sat alone on the bench behind them, shoulders shaking. I didn't approach her. I understood now that closure doesn't always look like comfort. Life continued. Nevera expanded again. International contracts finalized. The scholarship fund doubled in size after several donors quietly matched my contribution. One evening, months later, Miles asked a question I'd been expecting but dreading. "Mom," he said, coloring carefully at the table, "why don't we see Grandma and Grandpa anymore?" I knelt beside him. "Because they made choices that hurt people," I said gently. "And sometimes loving someone means not letting them keep doing harm." He thought about that. "Are they bad people?" I considered the answer carefully. "They made bad choices for a long time," I said. "That doesn't mean you have to carry them." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to coloring. Later that night, I stood on the balcony again, city lights blinking like distant stars. Evan joined me, slipping his arm around my waist. "You know," he said softly, "some people spend their whole lives waiting for justice to feel good." And I asked, "And you didn't," he said. "You waited for peace." I leaned into him, watching the water below. Justice had come, but peace, that had been mine long before. And I realized, standing there, that I was no longer defined by who abandoned me, who lied, or who fell. I was defined by what I built when I stopped asking for permission to exist. The past was finally finished, not because it apologized, but because it no longer controlled the ending. Time did what it always does when truth finally settles. It normalized the aftermath. The headlines faded first. New scandals replaced old ones. My parents' names stopped appearing in news alerts, then disappeared entirely. The court proceedings moved into their quiet, bureaucratic phase where consequences are enforced without commentary. Prison terms were set. Assets were liquidated. Restitution accounts were established. Life didn't explode afterward. It recalibrated. At Nevera, the pace was relentless but purposeful. We launched the international pilot in 3 countries within 6 months. Hospitals reported reduced post-op complications. Nurses sent handwritten notes thanking our team for systems that actually made their shifts easier. I framed one of those notes and hung it near my desk, not for motivation, but for grounding. Evan and I fell into a rhythm that felt earned. Mornings were coffee and logistics. Evenings were homework, dinner, and the soft exhaustion that comes from days spent on things that matter. Miles lost 2 teeth, learned long division, and decided, temporarily, that he wanted to be a marine biologist because the ocean doesn't lie. One evening, as I tucked him in, he asked, "Do people ever stop being scared?" I smiled, brushing his hair back. They stop listening to fear when they learn to trust themselves. He considered that, eyes heavy. "Did you?" "Yes," I said. "Eventually." The letter arrived in early spring, forwarded through my attorney. Lena's handwriting had changed, less practiced, more honest. She wrote about the certification exam she'd passed, about working nights at a clinic as an assistant, filing charts without shortcuts, about learning to answer questions without embellishment. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for help. She wrote, "I think I finally understand what you meant by building something real." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to hide it, but to keep it without letting it define anything. That same week, I received an invitation to speak at a university symposium on ethics in medical innovation. The topic list included accountability, transparency, and leadership without legacy advantage. I accepted. Standing at the podium weeks later, I looked out over rows of students, some confident, some anxious, all listening. I spoke about systems, about incentives, about how silence can be engineered as effectively as progress. During the Q&A, a young man raised his hand. "How do you deal with resentment?" he asked, "when success comes after harm?" I paused. You don't erase resentment, I said. You outgrow it. You give your energy to something that can't survive on bitterness. Afterward, a faculty member approached me. Your clarity, she said, it's rare. I smiled. It's practiced. At home, Evan watched me pack for another trip and shook his head fondly. You used to apologize for leaving the room, he said. Now you command it. I learned the difference between presence and permission, I replied. Spring turned the city green. We planted tomatoes again. Miles took responsibility for watering them, reminding me solemnly when I forgot. On weekends, we rode bikes along the waterfront. I felt something unfamiliar during those moments. Not happiness exactly, but alignment. Like everything inside me finally pointed in the same direction. Then came the call I didn't expect. From my father. I stared at the number until it stopped ringing. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Smaller. There was no anger in it. No command. I won't ask you to visit, he said. I just wanted you to know. I understand now that being proud of one child doesn't require diminishing another. I learned it too late. I deleted the message. Not out of cruelty. Out of completion. That night I told Evan. He nodded, unsurprised. You don't owe anyone an audience, he said. I know, I replied. I just wanted to be sure I felt nothing when I heard it. And he asked. Nothing, I said honestly. The summer heat arrived early. Navarra announced a new initiative, low-cost monitoring systems for rural clinics. The press framed it as philanthropy. I corrected them gently. It's infrastructure, I said. Healthcare should scale compassion, not scarcity. Miles watched the interview later and asked, Are you famous now? I laughed. No, I'm useful. He grinned. That's better. In August, the Restitution Fund reported its first completed payments to affected patients. Quiet transfers, apologies without faces, repairs without ceremony. I read the report once, then archived it. Some things don't need revisiting. On a warm evening near the end of summer, Evan and I sat on the balcony again, watching ships slide across the harbor. He poured wine. I leaned back in my chair, content. You know, he said, most people think closure is confrontation. It's not, I said. It's consistency. He smiled. You're very good at that. I thought of the girl I used to be, measuring herself by proximity to approval, bracing for abandonment, mistaking endurance for virtue. She hadn't failed. She'd adapted. And then she'd chosen better. As the city lights flickered on, I realized something simple and steady. The story no longer needed escalation. No twists. No reckonings left to arrive. What remained was life. Unremarkable in the best possible way. And that, I'd learned, was the most powerful ending of all. The first snowfall of winter arrived quietly, dusting the city in white without warning. I watched it from my office window as people hurried along the sidewalks below, coats pulled tight, breath clouding the air. There was a time when moments like this would have made me reflective in a way that hurt. Now it simply felt complete. Navarra closed the year stronger than projected. International partners renewed contracts early. Our Rural Systems Initiative received federal backing, expanding faster than any of us had anticipated. At the final board meeting of the year, one of the senior directors leaned back in his chair and said, almost casually, You've built something that will outlast all of us. I didn't respond right away. Legacy used to be a word that tasted bitter to me. Now it felt neutral. Earned, not inherited. That evening, Evan came home earlier than usual. Miles was sprawled on the living room floor, constructing an elaborate city out of blocks, narrating every move like a documentary filmmaker. Careful, Evan warned solemnly. That bridge looks structurally unsound. Miles grinned. Mom taught me better than that. I laughed, warmth spreading through me. These were the moments that mattered. The ones no courtroom, no headline, no family myth could touch. Later, after Miles was asleep, Evan joined me on the couch with 2 mugs of tea. "You've been quiet today," he said. "I was thinking," I replied, "about how different everything feels now. In a good way. In a finished way." He studied me. "That sounds like closure." I shook my head slowly. Not closure. Ownership. The difference mattered. A week later, an envelope arrived with unfamiliar handwriting. No return address I recognized. Inside was a short note from one of the scholarship recipients. She wrote about being the first in her family to attend college, about working nights and studying during lunch breaks, about how the letter confirming her tuition coverage made her sit down on the floor and cry because, for the first time, someone had invested in her without conditions. I read it twice. Then I placed it in the same drawer as Lena's letter, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of redirection. Just before the holidays, Lena sent one final message. "I'm staying in this job. It's hard, but it's honest. I think that matters." I replied with a single line. "It does." We didn't speak again after that, and for once, the silence felt mutual rather than imposed. The holidays themselves were simple. No travel. No elaborate rituals. Evan cooked. Miles insisted on decorating the tree, asymmetrically for artistic balance. Friends stopped by with wine and laughter and stories that had nothing to do with the past. On Christmas morning, as sunlight filtered through the windows, Miles tore into his gifts with unfiltered joy. At one point, he paused, holding a small box in his hands. "This one's for you," he said, suddenly serious. Inside was a lopsided ornament he'd made at school. Painted blue. Crooked. Perfect. "It's you," he explained. "Because you fix things." I pulled him into a hug, emotion catching unexpectedly in my throat. That afternoon, while Evan and Miles napped, I stepped onto the balcony alone. Snow drifted lazily from the sky. The city hung beneath it all, steady and alive. I thought of the house in Ravenwood, empty now. The clinic sign taken down. The story that once defined me reduced to footnotes and court records. I felt no pull toward it, no urge to revisit or reframe. Some stories don't need revisiting once they've been told truthfully. In early spring, Navarra finalized the first class of scholarship recipients. 20 names, 20 futures, shifting quietly without spectacle. At the signing ceremony, there were no speeches, just paperwork, handshakes, and the soft weight of possibility. As I left the building, one of the students called after me. "Ms. Caldwell." I turned. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing people like me." I smiled. "Just make something real with it." She nodded, determination clear in her eyes. That night, Evan and I walked along the harbor, hands brushing, the water reflecting city lights like scattered stars. "You ever miss it?" he asked suddenly. "The version of life you were supposed to have?" I considered the question honestly. "No," I said. "I miss who I thought I needed to be to earn love. But I don't miss the life built around that idea." He squeezed my hand. "Good." As the seasons shifted again, I realized something quietly profound. My story no longer revolved around loss, exposure, or vindication. Those were chapters, necessary ones, but they weren't the ending. The ending was this: a life built deliberately, a family chosen daily, work that mattered, silence that felt safe. I had stopped measuring myself against what I was denied and started valuing what I protected. And that was the final truth. Not everyone who hurts you will understand what they did. Not every ending will come with apologies. Not every injustice will feel satisfying when corrected. But you don't need any of that to move forward. You only need the moment when you stop asking to be seen and start deciding what deserves your attention. That moment changes everything. And once it arrives, nothing from the past can ever take it back. If my story stayed with you, support it by subscribing and sharing where you're watching from. Your small action helps unheard stories reach the right people.